Okay, it doesn't seem like we have Gisu. Let's bring in Esha Krishnas Awami, who's a podcaster and journalist from St. Petersburg. Welcome to the program. We want to take a look at the issue of human rights. Obviously, it's always good to highlight human rights, but the double standards that are at play, given that the Islamic Republic has been a victim of that, is the lens that I'd like to ask you. You're in St. Petersburg. Russia also, I believe, has been a victim of this double standards when it comes to the West, in particular from the U.S. What do you think about countries that use the issue of human rights for political gains, generally speaking, and whether that is actually addressed in this particular summit, which is said to be the biggest summit ever on human rights?
Obviously, Western countries have always abused the issue of human rights. That's the first thing they stick to. With Iran, they're claiming it's women's rights. But under the Shah that the Western government supported, women's literacy rate was only 35.48% in 1976. So it's clearly a political tool. And yesterday, I was listening to Antonio Gutierrez's speech, and he mentioned Russia's human rights violations in Ukraine, but he did not mention the ghastly happenings on the Ukrainian side for the past 7 years in the regions of Donetsk and Lugansk. For example, I've written an article about this. Ukraine deployed fascist battalions known as the Tornado Battalion that did every atrocity known to man. I personally have witnessed mass graves in Lugansk. People have been tortured. And all of these are just what was not addressed in his speech. So I'm very skeptical that this will be a forum to be more neutral. Another example is, of course, the women's rights in Afghanistan, where the US uses it as a cudgel right now, but they've had 20 years to improve women's rights, and they mostly installed a lot of pro-US, for lack of a better word, warlords who didn't take much into women's rights. So it's always been a political tool, and I just don't see anything from the staff or the Secretary General to see that it's going to change to be anything more than a big political tool. So he mentioned Russia, he mentioned some other countries. He never mentioned the fact that the US has imprisoned God knows how many people now in Guantanamo Bay for 22 years almost, not a single person has been convicted. So yeah, it seems like as long as the UN is in the current condition with the world order that was created right after World War II, human rights will always be a cudgel as opposed to a genuine concern on the rights of humans.
Okay, we now do have our correspondent Gisu Ahmadi, who joins us from Geneva. Well, Gisu, we know our foreign minister has addressed another topic in terms of global disarmament, I believe. If you can tell us about that, and of course, anything else you'd like to add to what you're witnessing there.
Definitely. Actually, it has been a very hectic 2-day visit for the Iranian foreign minister, back-to-back bilateral meetings, and of course, very important speeches, just as we talked about in the previous bulletin about the Human Rights Council and the minister's address. Also, today's address was quite important regarding global disarmament, which, of course, Iran did mention its position very clearly regarding its very adamant position regarding our region being free of weapons of mass destruction, and also the entire world being disarmed, particularly of nuclear arms, which is the most important issue. Regarding the war in Ukraine, Iran reiterated its stance that it supports negotiations to solve these issues and does not see any solution in this war being continued in any way, shape, or form. And also, he did mention Skylink and the fact that this is a project that could have military dimensions as well. It was quite a comprehensive speech regarding nuclear disarmament and disarmament in general and the importance of world peace. But most importantly, right now, I'm standing in a room where we're expecting the foreign minister any second to come in and hold a meeting with some NGOs that represent humanitarian organizations. We are also expecting a bilateral meeting with Martin Griffiths and also the Venezuelan foreign minister later in the afternoon. And also, the foreign minister is scheduled to have an exclusive interview with some of the representatives of the press that are present here, and I will keep you updated on that as well.
Oh, very well. Let me get on with another topic with you, Esha, if possible, and that is what our correspondent was talking about. If you can tell us about what you think about this whole notion of the types of pressure that's put, and again, I'm going to use Iran as an example, when it comes to nuclear disarmament, where Iran obviously has been blasted for what has been described to be a manufactured crisis when it comes to Iran's civilian nuclear program. Again, I'm using Iran as an example because it's been blasted that way and it's been sanctioned heavily. Russia obviously has had more sanctions now put on it. But they promote nuclear disarmament. They themselves have nuclear weapons, and their allies also possess nuclear weapons, yet they put this pressure on Iran that it's on a path for obtaining or weaponizing its nuclear program. Aren't these glaringly obvious double standards that are at play?
Yes, in a short word, these are glaringly obvious double standards. For example, the US doesn't even have a no first strike policy, so it means they can actually have a first strike nuclear attack. And recently, US and Russia have both abandoned the START treaty. So, yeah, the US. And if you look at the geopolitical nature, like in Libya, Iraq, it would make sense for many countries who feel threatened by the US to develop nuclear weapons as a way of protecting themselves. So as long as there is aggression to the scale that the US did against Libya or Iraq, of course, it's going to perpetuate. And yes, these are glaring double standards. And unfortunately, the Western press is not willing to call this out. And so these double standards just remain as a dark cloud. And it, of course, affects the credibility of anything that the Council says because they're not willing to do it themselves.
All right. I don't know if we have Gisu still with us. Gisu, I'm wondering what type of schedule the foreign minister has. Maybe you've covered that for the rest of the day. And if you can tell us some other topics perhaps that are going to be covered in this important conference.
Well, as I mentioned before, Kaveh, right now I'm in Intercontinental Hotel where the foreign minister is staying, and right outside a room where he is currently holding bilateral meetings with representative of humanitarian NGOs right now. Later in the day, there will be a meeting with Martin Griffiths from the UN, and also the Venezuelan foreign minister will also be meeting with the Iranian foreign minister. As you know, Iran and Venezuela are growing quite close, particularly regarding their economic relations, which have been expanding over the past couple of years. So this is also considered quite an important meeting. Basically, these 2 days of jam-packed bilateral meetings that the foreign minister has been attending are considered to be very significant, particularly the ones that I told you about yesterday with the foreign minister of Norway, the foreign minister of Belgium, and the foreign minister of Finland. And considering the fact that there was a lot of political pressure and, well, a lot of social media activity against this visit, it has been identified as quite a successful visit for the Iranian foreign minister, particularly his address yesterday, where there were lots of campaigns to undermine this speech, and actually did make quite an impact. And as I told you, even the very interesting word that was coined by the foreign minister himself, terrorism laundering, and actually using terrorism as a way to weaken countries, and in this case, particularly the Islamic Republic of Iran. So in a way, with any of the foreign analysts that I've talked to over the past couple of hours, they have estimated this meeting and these speeches as quite successful and a very important step for the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you very much for that. Gisami Shahmadi there live from Geneva. Sure, we'll be in touch. And thank you, Esha Krish Naswame, podcaster and journalist from St. Petersburg. Thank you to you both.